Are you confused about the terminology used in tools such as Google Search Console, Google Analytics, and want a better understanding of the dimensions and metrics and what you should be looking at? Well, let's help you out. So let's talk about a few different examples, a few different scenarios, some of the caveats that go along with these tools, and then some of the typical dimensions, metrics that we'd recommend looking at for comparisons and so on. So starting off with those running sponsored ads. Someone goes to Google, types in a query that triggers your sponsored ad, and they click through. Let's say you drop them in on a product service landing page. Google Ads is going to count that as one impression and one click. Now a different scenario is someone goes to Google, types in a query, and your organic result comes up. Let's say, for example, they click through to your homepage. That first click is going to count, as is the impression for your homepage being shown. Now let's say that user later on goes back to Google and types in something else that serves up your product landing page, and they click through. Again, it's going to count the click and the impression, which is going to give you a total of 2 impressions and 2 clicks. In the case of Google Analytics 4, they're not going to see the impression data in GA4, but what Google Analytics 4 will report is once someone hits your site, what actually happens. So in this instance, they won't show impression or click data, but they will show that there's been a session from a user. Now Google Analytics call it a user, but what they really mean is a device, because if you visit a website from a mobile phone and from a desktop, it will count as 2 users. However, in this scenario, we've said that the same person goes back and triggers the product landing page. Now, it's not going to count 2 users. It will count 2 sessions, but it will actually understand that it is the same user if you access it through the same device. So day 1, you come to the home page through your desktop. Day 2, you come to the product landing page through your desktop. That will count as 2 sessions, but only 1 user. As I say, as long as the device stays consistent. There are some further caveats where you can assign user IDs for people logging in, but most sites that we're talking about aren't going to be running anything like that. So as we see, Google Ads can see an impression and a click irrespective of what happens on your site. Search Console can see impressions and clicks, but Google Analytics 4 counts sessions and users. And if that user comes back to your site multiple times, it's still the single user with an increasing volume of sessions. There are some other caveats, as you can see here, which I've got down the bottom, and one of those is the 30-minute timeout, which adds a bit of complexity, because if someone's on your website, gets distracted, walks away from their computer and does nothing for over 30 minutes, comes back later, carries on browsing, that will trigger a new session start. You can override that setting and put in a longer timeout should you wish, but most people are just going to leave it defaulted to 30 minutes. So there are a few little caveats like that to be aware of. Now, in terms of then drilling into the information and what we would recommend as a starting point to analyze on and compare against, on the Google Ads side of things, you're looking at some of the things you'd expect: campaigns, ad groups, ads, keywords, and seeing how they're comparing, looking at things like month on month, year on year, and you'd also dive into some of the auction insights reports. In terms of the metrics you'd be looking at things like impressions, you'd be looking at clicks, cost per click, conversions, cost per conversions. You can create a custom column as conversions per impression, and if you're an e-com store, you'll be pulling in things like orders, revenue, and your ROAS, which would be your conversion value divided by your cost. In terms of Google Search Console, you have more limited data that you can analyze. So you can look at things like queries, you can look at things like the pages, you can look at things like the countries. And then on the metric side of things, you're going to be looking at position, impression, and clicks. They're the 3 main things that you're going to be able to see. But you have to take, again, the caveats, the pinches of salt that are going to come along with this. In the case of Google Search Console, position can be completely meaningless, because if you've only shown on the very odd occasion for a certain query in a very high position, your average position will read really high. But if you've only appeared for a tiny fraction of the impressions available for that query, it's not an accurate reflection of where you're appearing on average, because you're actually appearing only a fraction of the time. So that's one thing to be aware of. The other thing in Google Search Console specifically to be aware of is sampling. When you start drilling into the data too much in Google Search Console, they will apply sampling. This can happen in GA4 as well, where basically you'll look at the data and it will show X volume of impressions and say, for example, 0 clicks. but you can go into Google Analytics, look at the landing page report from organic search, and you will see that you've actually had people land on it. Because like I say, Google don't like it in Google Search Console when you drill down too finitely, and that will get sampled. In Google Analytics, they will tell you when they're sampling. You can see it in the top of the charts report. If you need a screenshot, let me know and I'll show you what it looks like. In Google Analytics, what sort of things we're going to be looking at? As I've just said, landing pages. We're going to be looking at where people are coming into the site. You can also build a custom report to look at where people are exiting the site. Exit pages aren't necessarily a bad thing. It's just where people leave the site. If that's halfway through the checkout process, then that is problematic. Same with the lead gen size. If they're partway through booking a calendar appointment or something like that, that is not great. There are naturally going to be places where people have got the information they want, hopefully complete the action, and then exit anyway. In terms of other data points you're going to want to look at, as well as the landing page, you're going to want to look at the channel-based stuff, how are people getting to your site, and then comparing that month on month, year on year for seasonality trends, and so on. So you can see, for example, how organic search or paid search or any other channel is doing, say, for example, December compared to December last year, and also compared to November. In terms of some of the metrics you're going to look at things like sessions, users, engagement time, those sorts of bits of information. And then I have put up here as well that there is the ability to also drill into data. In our case, we subscribe to Ahrefs, whether it's Ahrefs, SEMrush, or any other keyword tracking tool. And the reason that is useful is for exactly what I said is the limitation with Google Search Console, which is it won't show you all the positional data. And it's really hard to see the trends of it. Whereas with a tool like Ahrefs, what you can do is you can look at how your website is ranking for specific keywords, by page, and so on, and see how that's been trending over time. Again, another caveat I have to introduce with Ahrefs is in its standard reporting, you'll look at the keywords and they might not have been updated for a number of days or weeks. So in that case, that's where tools like their daily rank tracker and so on come into play, because then you can pick a specific number of keywords you want to monitor on a daily basis and then see how they are trending over time. So if you use the Site Explorer in Ahrefs, the caveat is the last crawl date that it did for that keyword, and that's why the daily rank tracker is a bit better. If we're looking in a tool like Ahrefs to see how things are doing, again, we're going to be looking at page level data to see how many keywords a page ranks for, whether that's increasing, decreasing, and what the composition of those keywords are. We're going to be looking at keywords themselves, high value keywords. We're going to be looking at country level data on some of our clients, especially the multinationals. And on the metric side, we're going to be looking at things like the position, the search volume. We're also going to be looking at the CPC data, the cost per click data that tools like Ahrefs or SEMrush pull in, because we're interested in commercial orientated terms. They typically tend to be the terms that don't show as much for AI overviews, although that's changing a bit. And for us, we want to understand the high value keywords that have high commercial intent, because they're usually going to be the ones that drive the quality leads you want to see. So hopefully that gives you a quick explainer-ish of the different metrics, the different data points, and how the different tools talk about users, sessions, impressions, and clicks. But if you've got any questions, queries, let us know. I can dive into this in any more detail and also show use cases in the actual tools if people find this helpful. Cheers.